She had $20 in her wallet and a child waiting at home. When the millionaire asked her to dinner, she said yes. What she told him at the table changed both their lives forever. The evening crowd at Harrington's fine dining moved like silk through the candle-lit room, their laughter blending with the gentle clink of crystal glasses and the soft murmur of conversations conducted in hushed, privileged tones. Eliza Mitchell adjusted her black apron for the 100th time that night, catching her reflection in the polished service window. 28 years old, hair pulled back in a neat ponytail that was beginning to escape its elastic prison, dark circles beneath her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She'd been on her feet for 9 hours straight, and there were still 3 more to go before she could collect Oliver from Lorraine's flat and collapse into the cheap mattress that served as her bed. "Table 14 needs their wine topped up," called Marcus, the head waiter, his voice carrying that particular edge that meant important guests were in the house. He was a thin man with perpetually pursed lips and the ability to make even simple instructions sound like threats. "And for heaven's sake, Eliza, smile. The Westbrook Foundation people don't want to see exhaustion. They want to feel good about their charitable donations." Eliza nodded and grabbed the bottle of Chateau something or other from the ice bucket, noting the label long enough to know it cost more than her weekly grocery budget. The charity gala had filled every table in the restaurant, men in tailored suits discussing investment portfolios and share prices, women in designer dresses comparing holiday homes and private school admissions. She had learned long ago to become invisible among such people, to pour and clear and vanish before they remembered she existed. The less they noticed her, the less likely they were to complain. Table 14 sat near the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking Melbourne's glittering skyline. The city sprawled below in ribbons of light, beautiful and utterly unreachable to someone who counted coins to afford the tram fare. 8 guests surrounded the circular table, draped in white linen, but Eliza's attention snagged on the man at the head. He was perhaps mid-30s, with dark hair slightly disheveled, as though he had run his fingers through it in frustration, and eyes the color of strong coffee that seemed to see more than they should. Unlike the others who barely glanced at the waitstaff, if they acknowledged them at all, he looked directly at her as she approached, not through her, not past her, but at her, as if she were an actual person rather than a walking wine bottle. "Thank you," he said when she refilled his glass. Simple words, 2 syllables, but he said them like he meant them, like he actually saw the human being holding the bottle. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks, unexpected and unwelcome. She didn't blush. She had trained herself out of blushing years ago when she realized that vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. "You're welcome, sir." She moved around the table with practiced efficiency, topping up glasses, careful not to let the bottle drip on the expensive tablecloth. The woman beside the dark-haired man, blonde, polished, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than 3 months of Eliza's rent, let out a sharp laugh that cut through the ambient noise like breaking glass. "Dominic, darling, you're not actually listening to anything I'm saying." The woman's voice carried that particular tone of possession, of ownership, that Eliza had heard 1,000 times from wealthy women speaking about things they considered theirs. "I was telling everyone about the villa in Tuscany. The renovation is finally complete, and the views are absolutely divine. Mother wants us to host the autumn gathering there this year." "I heard you, Felicity." The man called Dominic sounded tired, the kind of deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. "You've mentioned the villa 3 times. The views are divine. The renovations cost a fortune. The autumn gathering will be lovely." Felicity's smile didn't waver. It was the kind of smile that had been surgically attached in deportment classes, but something cold flickered in her eyes, something that Eliza recognized instinctively as dangerous. "You're in a mood tonight. Perhaps we should discuss it later." Eliza finished pouring and retreated to the service station, but she could feel someone watching her as she walked away. When she glanced back over her shoulder, Dominic was looking in her direction with an expression she couldn't quite read. Curiosity, perhaps, or something else entirely. The night wore on, in its endless parade of plates and glasses, and polite requests delivered with undertones of command. Eliza's feet screamed in her sensible black shoes, and her lower back had developed a persistent ache that she knew would keep her awake long after she finally got home. Around 11, most of the gala guests had departed in a flurry of air kisses and promises to do lunch, leaving scattered tables of stragglers nursing final drinks. She was clearing dessert plates from a leather booth near the back, her mind already calculating whether she had enough milk at home for Oliver's morning bottle, when she nearly collided with someone blocking her path. "I'm so sorry." She stepped back quickly, clutching the stack of plates to her chest like a shield. Then she looked up and felt her breath catch. It was him, Dominic. Up close, without the barrier of a table between them, she could see the exhaustion in his face that mirrored her own. The fine lines around his eyes that spoke of too many late nights and early mornings, the tension in his jaw that suggested he spent far too much time clenching it against words he wanted to say but couldn't. "No, my fault entirely." He smiled, and the expression transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely warm, like sunshine breaking through Melbourne's perpetual grey clouds. "I was escaping, to be honest. These events are suffocating. All that conversation about nothing of consequence, all those smiles that don't reach anyone's eyes." Eliza wasn't sure what to say. Guests didn't usually chat with the waitstaff beyond complaints or requests. The invisible wall between servers and served was maintained by both parties, an unspoken agreement that made everyone's night easier. "They do seem rather intense," she managed finally. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it." He glanced toward the exit where Felicity was holding court with a group of women, then back at Eliza with what looked like relief. "I don't suppose you'd like to get coffee? After your shift, I mean. There's a place around the corner that stays open until 2. They do a decent flat white." The plates in her hands suddenly felt very heavy. Everything felt heavy. The offer, the implications, the impossible gulf between who he was and who she was. That's very kind, but I can't." "Of course." He stepped back immediately, and she saw something like disappointment cross his features before he schooled it into polite acceptance. "Forgive me, that was forward. I shouldn't have put you on the spot while you're working. It's not that." The words came out before she could stop them, before her carefully constructed walls could slam down. "I have to get home. My son. He's with a neighbor, and I can't keep her waiting past midnight. She's got her own health issues, and it's not fair to ask more than I already do." She expected the usual reaction, the subtle recoil, the polite withdrawal that always came when single motherhood entered the conversation. Men didn't want complications. Men didn't want another man's child. Men wanted easy and uncomplicated, not a 28-year-old waitress with a toddler and an empty bank account. Instead, Dominic nodded thoughtfully, as if she had said something that required genuine consideration rather than immediate dismissal. "How old is he?" "Your son?" 2. He'll be 2.5 next month." She couldn't help the softening in her voice when she talked about Oliver. He was the one pure good thing in her life, the reason she dragged herself out of bed every morning and put on this apron and smiled at people who looked through her. "What about tomorrow?" Dominic asked. "During the day, perhaps. I know a cafe that does excellent pancakes, family-friendly place, toys in the corner, that sort of thing. Does your son like pancakes?" Eliza stared at him, certain she had misheard. In 2 years of raising Oliver alone, 2 years of cancelled dates when she mentioned him, of men who suddenly remembered pressing engagements, of being made to feel like her child was a defect rather than a blessing, no man had ever included him in an invitation. "He's 2. He likes anything he can smash with his hands." Dominic laughed, and the sound was genuine, rumbling up from somewhere real rather than performed for an audience. "Perfect. Sounds like excellent company. Saturday then, around 11? Brennan's Cafe in Richmond?" They have a play area, and the coffee is actually drinkable. Against every instinct screaming at her to refuse, against every lesson life had taught her about hoping for things she couldn't have, Eliza found herself nodding. All right, Saturday. She didn't sleep that night. After collecting Oliver from Lorraine's flat, her 55-year-old neighbor who had become something like family over the past 2 years, the only person besides her son that Eliza trusted completely, she lay in her tiny bedroom, listening to her child's soft breathing through the baby monitor. The sound was the most comforting thing she knew, that gentle rhythm of in and out that meant he was safe, he was healthy, he was here. What was she thinking? Men like Dominic didn't date women like her. They dated women like Felicity, with their perfect hair and designer clothes and complete absence of sticky toddler handprints on their furniture. They dated women who knew which fork to use and how to pronounce the names of French wines and what to say at charity galas. They didn't date exhausted waitresses who lived in one-bedroom flats and couldn't afford new shoes. By morning, she had convinced herself he wouldn't show. Rich people made casual promises all the time and forgot them by sunrise, didn't they? It was a reflex for them, a social lubricant, saying things they had no intention of following through on. But she dressed Oliver in his cleanest overalls anyway, the ones with the dinosaur on the pocket that he loved so much he threw a tantrum when she tried to wash them, combed her hair properly instead of just scraping it back, and drove her battered 15-year-old Corolla to Richmond. The car made ominous sounds the entire way, the kind of sounds that meant expensive repairs she couldn't afford and probably wouldn't address until something actually fell off. Just another item on the endless list of things she worried about at 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come. Brennan's cafe was warm and busy, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon and something sweet baking in the kitchen. Families occupied most of the tables, children making the particular kind of contained chaos that parents learned to tune out. Eliza spotted Dominic immediately, sitting at a corner table by the window where morning light fell across his face. He was wearing casual clothes, jeans, and a simple blue shirt, and somehow looked even more handsome without the formal charity gala polish. He stood when he saw her, and his face lit up in a way that made her heart do something strange and fluttery in her chest. "You came." He sounded genuinely surprised, as if he had been sitting there preparing himself for disappointment. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," she admitted, because what was the point of pretending otherwise? He looked at Oliver, who was clinging to her hip with his face buried in her shoulder, one small hand fisted in the fabric of her shirt. Her son always did that when he was uncertain, held on to her like she was the only solid thing in a confusing world. And this must be the pancake destroyer. "Oliver." She rubbed her son's back in the slow circles that usually helped him relax. "He's shy with new people at first. Takes him a while to warm up." Understandable. Dominic didn't push, didn't try to engage the toddler before he was ready, didn't do any of the aggressive befriending that usually made Oliver retreat further into his shell. Instead, he simply pulled out a chair for Eliza and waited until she was settled with Oliver on her lap before sitting down himself. "I'm the same way, honestly. Parties are exhausting. Too many new faces, too much small talk. Give me a quiet corner and one person worth talking to any day." They ordered pancakes with banana for Oliver, eggs and sourdough for Eliza, and an elaborate smashed avocado thing for Dominic that came with microgreens and a tiny drizzle of something that looked like it cost extra. The conversation flowed easier than she had any right to expect. Dominic asked about her work, listening with genuine interest as she described the chaos of fine dining service, the impossible customers, and the even more impossible managers. In turn, she learned that he ran his family's property development company, Westbrook Holdings, a name she vaguely recognized from buildings around the city, that he had lost his father 3 years ago to a sudden heart attack, that he found charity galas unbearable, but attended them because his mother would never forgive him otherwise. He talked about his work with the detached frustration of someone who had inherited a responsibility he hadn't asked for, who did it well because that was what was expected, but who didn't love it the way his father had. Oliver warmed up slowly, the way 2-year-olds do when they're naturally cautious. First he peeked at Dominic from behind Eliza's arm, quick glances that darted away when Dominic looked back. Then he pointed at Dominic's watch, a heavy silver thing with a dark face, and said, "Shiny. You like that?" Dominic unstrapped the watch without hesitation, a watch that Eliza was fairly certain cost more than her entire flat's contents combined, and held it out for Oliver to examine. "Careful, it's a bit heavy." "He'll get it sticky," Eliza started, reaching to intervene. "It's just a watch." Dominic shrugged, with an ease that suggested he genuinely didn't care about the expensive object, now clutched in her toddler's syrup-covered fingers. "Things can be cleaned. Besides, what's the point of having nice things if you can't let someone enjoy them?" Oliver turned the watch over in his small hands, fascinated by the way the light caught the metal and made patterns on the ceiling. "Pretty," he declared solemnly, in that way toddlers have of pronouncing judgment on the world. Then he promptly tried to dip it in his orange juice to see if it would make the juice shiny too. "Oliver!" Eliza grabbed for it, but Dominic was faster, rescuing the watch with a laugh that held no trace of irritation or dismay. "Excellent instinct," he told Oliver with complete seriousness, as if they were colleagues discussing an important scientific experiment. "Always test whether things are waterproof. Very practical." By the time their plates were empty, Oliver's mostly on his face and the table rather than in his stomach, the toddler had migrated from Eliza's lap to the chair between them, chattering away in his particular mix of real words and enthusiastic babble. "Big truck," he announced, pointing out the window at a delivery vehicle. "Doggy." This at a golden retriever walking past with its owner. Dominic listened as though her 2-year-old's observations about trucks and puppies and the color blue was the most fascinating conversation he'd had all week. He asked follow-up questions. He nodded seriously at Oliver's long, incomprehensible answers. He made eye contact at the appropriate moments and said, "Really? And that's interesting," with the same gravity he probably used in boardroom meetings. When the bill came, Dominic reached for it automatically, the reflexive gesture of someone who always paid. Eliza felt her stomach tighten into the familiar knot of financial anxiety. "I should pay for mine." She reached for her purse, already knowing what she would find. $23 and some coins, remnants of the tips from Thursday night. The pancakes alone had been $18. "Please, let me." Dominic's voice was gentle, without any trace of condescension or pity. "I invited you. It's the least I can do. But if we're going to—" She stopped, suddenly uncertain of what she was trying to say, of what they were doing. "I mean, if this is a date, I should pay my share. It's only fair. I don't want you to think I expect you to—" "Eliza." He set down the bill and met her eyes directly. "I don't care about fair. I care about having breakfast with someone who actually talks to me like a human being instead of a walking checkbook. That's rarer than you might think." She should have left it there, should have smiled graciously and accepted the kindness, and pretended she was someone who could afford to split dinner bills and buy new clothes, and not count every cent at the supermarket. But something in his earnestness, the way he looked at her like she mattered, like her words meant something, made the truth spill out. "I can't afford this." The words came out barely above a whisper, choked with the shame she had spent years trying to bury. "I can't afford this date, or any date really. I have $20 to last until Tuesday. My rent is 3 weeks behind, and the landlord is starting to leave notes. I work double shifts just to keep Oliver in childcare so I can work more double shifts. It's a cycle I can't break. So if you're looking for someone who can keep up with charity galas and fancy restaurants, I'm not her. I'm sorry. I should have said something before wasting your time." The silence stretched between them, thick and terrible. Oliver, oblivious to the tension crackling over his head, was making his toy car drive across the table. "Vroom!" he said happily. Fast car. Eliza waited for Dominic to make his excuses, to suddenly remember an urgent appointment, to do what everyone always did when they discovered she wasn't worth the effort. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and dry, and his grip was firm without being constraining. Do you know why I asked you to coffee last night? His voice was quiet but steady, meant only for her. Because in a room full of people trying to impress me, people who wanted something from me, people who saw me as a means to an end, you were the only one who looked at me like I was just a person, not a name or a bank account, not a connection to be leveraged or an opportunity to be exploited, just someone who said thank you when you poured his wine. Eliza's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, not wanting to cry in public, not wanting to be the pathetic, sobbing woman making a scene in a family cafe. I don't care about your bank account, Dominic continued, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. I have more money than I know what to do with, and it has brought me nothing but people who want pieces of it. What I don't have, what I haven't had in years, is someone who tells me the truth. You just told me more truth in 30 seconds than anyone has told me in years. That's not weakness, Eliza. That's courage. That's exactly what I've been looking for. Oh, Oliver looked up from his car, noticed the tears tracking silently down his mother's cheeks, and immediately reached for her with concern, crinkling his small features. Mama sad. No, baby. She pulled him into her lap, burying her face in his soft hair that always smelled like baby shampoo, and something uniquely him. Mama's okay. Mama's fine. Mama okay, Oliver repeated firmly, as if saying it would make it true. He patted her cheek with fingers still sticky from breakfast. No sad. Then he looked at Dominic with something like suspicion, the protective instinct that even toddlers have for their mothers. You nice? Dominic met the child's gaze with complete seriousness, as if being questioned by a 2-year-old required the same respect as a board meeting. I'm trying to be. Oliver considered this for a long moment, weighing Dominic's words against some internal toddler metric of trustworthiness. Then he nodded once, satisfied, and returned to his toy car. Okay, he pronounced. The matter was settled. Eliza laughed despite herself, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. He doesn't usually warm up to people this quickly. He's shy, cautious. It took him weeks to stop hiding from the postman. I'll take that as a compliment. Dominic squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Now, may I please pay for breakfast? Not because I think you can't manage, but because I asked you here, and it would genuinely make me happy. She nodded, not trusting her voice to hold steady. Walking out of the cafe, Oliver perched triumphantly on Dominic's shoulders because the toddler had demanded up, and Dominic had complied without hesitation. Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Terrifying, fragile, probably foolish hope. The kind that always got crushed under the weight of real life and practical concerns and the fundamental unfairness of the universe. But for now, in the morning sun, with her son giggling as Dominic made exaggerated stomping sounds and pretended to be a giant, she let herself hold on to it. The weeks that followed unfolded, like something from a dream Eliza was afraid to believe in. Dominic called when he said he would, every single time. He showed up when he promised, not late, not with excuses. He learned Oliver's nap schedule within the first week and never suggested activities that would interfere with it, planning their outings around the sacred 2 to 4 window when her son needed sleep more than stimulation. He brought groceries because he happened to be passing by her suburb, which was 20 minutes out of his way. He fixed the leaking tap in her kitchen because it seemed to be bothering her, though she suspected he had Googled how to do it beforehand because his hands had been uncertain on the wrench. Small things, things that shouldn't have meant so much. But after 2 years of doing everything alone, of being the only adult in Oliver's life who showed up consistently, they felt like miracles. Lorraine watched these developments with unconcealed delight, practically pressing her face to the window whenever Dominic's car pulled into the car park. That man's a keeper, she declared one evening, watching from her doorway as Dominic helped Eliza unload Oliver and 3 bags of groceries from his expensive sedan. "You can tell by the way he looks at you, like you're something precious." Eliza settled into Lorraine's worn armchair, accepting the cup of tea her neighbor pressed into her hands with the same motherly insistence she always had. Lorraine's flat smelled like lavender and the lamb roast she'd made for dinner, comforting smells that reminded Eliza of a grandmother she'd never really had. "It's too fast. We've only known each other a month. Men like him don't end up with women like me. It doesn't happen." "Why not?" Lorraine's voice sharpened, in that way it did when she thought Eliza was being unnecessarily hard on herself. "Because you're not rich. Because you work for a living instead of inheriting everything. Because you had the courage to raise that beautiful boy on your own when his father ran off like the coward he was. Because it doesn't make sense." Eliza stared into her tea, watching the steam curl and vanish. "There has to be a catch, something I'm not seeing. People don't just help, not without wanting something." Lorraine sat down across from her, her arthritic knees popping as they always did these days. At 55, she had seen enough of life to speak with authority on its cruelties and its surprises. She had buried a husband, weathered a bitter estrangement from her own children, rebuilt herself from the ground up. "I was married to a man who looked perfect on paper for 23 years, she said quietly. "Good family, good job, good reputation in the community. Do you know what I learned? Paper doesn't keep you warm at night. Paper doesn't bring you soup when you're sick or remember how you take your coffee. Paper doesn't look at you like you hung the moon." "He does look at me like that," Eliza admitted, in barely more than a whisper. "It terrifies me. Like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Good." Lorraine patted her hand with fingers bent by arthritis, but still strong. "Being terrified means you've got something to lose. That's not weakness, love. That's called living. It's about bloody time you started doing some of it." The first warning came at a charity auction 3 weeks later. Dominic had invited her as his date, and though she had protested extensively about not having anything appropriate to wear, not knowing how to behave at such events, not belonging in his world, he had gently overridden every objection. He arranged for a personal shopper to help her find a dress, refusing to tell her the price despite her repeated demands. And when she emerged from the fitting room in navy blue silk that made her feel like a different person, the look on his face had silenced every remaining protest. "You don't need expensive," he had told her, adjusting the simple silver necklace that came with the dress. "You just need something that makes you feel confident. The rest takes care of itself." The event was held at the Grand Victoria Hotel, all crystal chandeliers and ice sculptures and art on the walls that probably cost more than houses. Eliza felt hopelessly out of place despite the beautiful dress, clutching Dominic's arm like a lifeline as they navigated the glittering crowd. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, exchanging air kisses and gossip in that particular language of the wealthy that she didn't speak. Then she saw her, Felicity Ashworth, the blonde from the charity gala at Harrington's, the one who had called Dominic darling and talked about Tuscan villas with proprietary authority. She was crossing the room with purpose in her stride and ice in her eyes, and she was heading directly toward them. "Dominic." Felicity's voice was honey poured over broken glass, sweet on the surface and sharp enough to cut beneath. "I didn't expect to see you here. You usually avoid the Melbourne Foundation events." "Felicity." Dominic's arm tightened around Eliza's waist, drawing her closer. "Allow me to introduce Eliza Mitchell. Eliza, this is Felicity Ashworth, an old acquaintance." The way he said the word made clear it had once been something more, something that had ended badly. Eliza filed that information away for later when she could process it without an audience. Felicity's gaze swept over Eliza with the precision of a barcode scanner, cataloging and categorizing. Eliza knew exactly what she was seeing, The department store dress that probably cost a fraction of Felicity's shoes, the modest jewelry that couldn't compete with the diamonds dripping from Felicity's ears, the uncertainty in her posture that screamed imposter. How lovely! Felicity's smile didn't reach her eyes, didn't even attempt to. "And what do you do, Eliza?" "I'm a waitress." No point in pretending otherwise. Lies had a way of unraveling at the worst possible moments. "At Harrington's Fine Dining. I believe I served your table a few weeks ago." Something flickered across Felicity's face. Recognition, perhaps, or recalculation. "Oh, how industrious of you." The single word, the pause before it, carried a symphony of judgment. Eliza felt her cheeks warm but kept her expression neutral. She had dealt with worse than passive-aggressive socialites. She had survived Oliver's father leaving, had survived her own parents' rejection, had survived 2 years of exhaustion and worry, and never quite having enough. She could survive Felicity Ashworth. Felicity! A man appeared at Dominic's shoulder, his voice carrying a clear warning. He was perhaps 40, with a kind face that was currently set in disapproval. "I believe your mother was looking for you. Something about the silent auction." Felicity's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Douglas, always so thoughtful. She turned back to Dominic, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "We should catch up properly, Dom. It's been too long since we talked. Really talked." When she finally glided away, trailing expensive perfume and unspoken threats, Douglas let out a breath. "Sorry about that. She's been circling like a reef shark since she heard Dominic was seeing someone. I should have intercepted her earlier." "Seeing someone?" Eliza looked up at Dominic, suddenly aware that they had never actually defined what they were doing. "Is that what we're doing?" "I certainly hope so." He pressed a kiss to her temple, soft and reassuring. "Unless you have objections to the terminology." She didn't. And that, she was beginning to realize, was exactly the problem. She was falling fast and hard, and she had no idea if there would be anything to catch her at the bottom. The auction proceeded, raising obscene amounts of money for children's hospitals, while Eliza tried not to calculate how many years of rent each item was worth. A weekend in the Maldives went for $40,000. A vintage car that looked like it belonged in a museum sold for 3 times that. She watched Dominic bid casually on things, winning some, losing others, treating amounts that would change her life as rounding errors. Douglas proved to be warm and funny, staying close and deflecting attention from her obvious discomfort with practiced ease. He told her stories of Dominic as a younger man, absolutely hopeless at cricket, but we don't talk about that in polite company, and asked about Oliver with genuine interest. "Dom's been different since he met you," Douglas said during a quiet moment when Dominic had stepped away to greet a business associate, lighter, like someone's lifted something heavy off his shoulders. "I haven't done anything special," Eliza protested. "I just talked to him. Listen, that's hardly remarkable." "Isn't it?" Douglas studied her with knowing eyes. "When's the last time someone told Dominic no, or disagreed with him about something that mattered, or treated him like a person with flaws and bad days instead of a prize to be won or a resource to be extracted?" She thought about that for a long time afterward, turning the question over in her mind like Oliver turned over his toy cars, examining it from every angle. Oliver's 3rd birthday fell on a rainy Saturday, the kind of grey Melbourne day that made everything feel muffled and soft. Eliza had planned a small celebration, just herself, Lorraine, and a homemade cake she had decorated with dinosaurs using coloured icing and more determination than skill. She couldn't afford a party venue or fancy decorations or a pile of expensive presents, and she had made her peace with that reality long ago. Dominic had other ideas. He arrived at her flat with bags upon bags, balloons in every colour, streamers that Oliver immediately tried to eat, a frankly excessive cake shaped like a dinosaur that must have cost a fortune, and presents wrapped in paper covered with cartoon trucks. Oliver went absolutely wild, abandoning his usual shy reserve to tear into packages with gleeful destruction. "You didn't have to do all this." Eliza stood in the middle of her transformed living room, overwhelmed by the chaos and color, by the way her tiny flat suddenly looked like joy had exploded inside it. "I wanted to." Dominic was on the floor with Oliver, helping him assemble a toy that appeared to have approximately 17,000 pieces. "He's 2. That's a milestone, a big deal. It should be celebrated properly." Oliver held up a plastic dinosaur triumphantly, one of a set of 12 that had emerged from the largest box. "Raw," he announced, making the dinosaur stomp across Dominic's knee. "Very fierce," Dominic agreed with complete seriousness, as if reviewing a military operation. "What's his name?" Oliver considered this question with the gravity it apparently deserved. His face scrunched up in thought, the way it always did when he was working through something important. Then his expression cleared, and he smiled his biggest, brightest smile. "Dom." Eliza choked on the tea she had just sipped. Dominic's face did something complicated. Surprise first, then something softer and more vulnerable that made her heart crack open just a little. "The dinosaur is named after you," she managed when she could speak again. "I'm deeply honored." Dominic's voice was rough around the edges, "though I hope I'm slightly less likely to bite." Later, after cake had been smashed into faces and furniture, after Oliver had crashed into a sugar coma nap, surrounded by wrapping paper and his new dinosaur army, Dominic helped Eliza clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only develops between people who have learned to exist in each other's space, without needing to fill every moment with words. "I want to tell you something," Dominic said, pausing with a garbage bag in hand. "About Felicity, about why she's the way she is with me, with you." Eliza's hands stilled on the cake plates she was stacking. She had been waiting for this, half dreading it, knowing it had to come. "We dated for 2 years. He sat down on her second-hand couch, looking suddenly exhausted. "My mother adored her. She comes from the right family, went to the right schools, knows all the right people, and says all the right things. When my father died and I inherited the company, Felicity started talking about wedding dates, venues, guest lists. Not because she wanted to marry me, I eventually realized, but because she wanted to marry the Westbrook name, the money, the social position. What happened? I caught her with someone else." His voice was flat, carefully emptied of emotion. "One of my business associates, actually. A man I had trusted, considered a friend. Apparently, she had been seeing him for months, the entire time she was planning our wedding. When I confronted her, she seemed genuinely confused about why I was upset. The marriage was about alliance, she said, about combining our family's interests. Fidelity was a quaint concept that didn't apply to people of our social standing." Eliza set down the plates and moved to sit beside him. "I'm sorry. That's awful." "Don't be sorry." He met her eyes, and she saw the old pain there, the scar tissue that had formed over the wound. "Breaking up with her was the best thing I ever did. It just took me a while to understand why, to understand what I actually wanted." He took her hand, the gesture so natural now, and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You're the reason I understand now," he continued quietly. "You and Oliver, and this tiny flat that feels more like home than my penthouse ever has. I love you, Eliza. I know it's fast. I know your life is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why this is impractical and probably inadvisable. I don't care about any of them. I love you, and I want you to know that." She should have said something sensible. Something about taking it slow, about Oliver's needs, about the 1,000 practical reasons this couldn't work. Instead, she rose up on her toes and kissed him, and felt him smile against her mouth. "I love you too," she whispered when they finally broke apart. "God help me, but I do." Lorraine, who had been tactfully occupying herself in the kitchen this entire time, let out a whoop of joy that startled them both and woke Oliver from his nap. The storm had been gathering for weeks, Eliza realized later. She had simply been too happy to see it coming. It started with small things, colleagues at the restaurant looking at her sideways, their conversations stopping abruptly when she approached. Whispers that she caught fragments of waitress, millionaire, gold digger, before they melted away into innocent silence. Her supervisor calling her into his office for a performance review that felt more like an interrogation about her personal life than her professional conduct. "There have been concerns raised," Marcus said carefully, adjusting his glasses in that nervous way he had, "about your conduct with certain high-profile guests." "My conduct?" Eliza felt cold creeping through her veins, the familiar chill of something about to go very wrong. "What exactly are you implying?" Nothing specifically." He couldn't meet her eyes. "Just be careful, Eliza. There are people asking questions, people with influence, people who could make things difficult for the restaurant, for you." She didn't need to ask who. The invisible fingerprints were everywhere if you knew to look for them. Lorraine noticed the change before Eliza was willing to admit it to herself. "You're pulling away," she said one evening, watching Eliza decline yet another call from Dominic, her phone buzzing insistently on the kitchen counter like an accusation. "You've stopped answering when he rings. You've cancelled the last 3 plans you made together. You're hiding from the best thing that's ever happened to you." "I'm protecting him." Eliza kept her voice hard, though it cost her everything she had. "And Oliver, if Felicity can dig up everything about my past, my financial troubles, my work record, God knows what else. What happens when she digs deeper? When she finds out about my mother, who hasn't spoken to me since I told her I was pregnant? My father, who pretended I died rather than admit his daughter was an unwed mother? What happens when she finds out Oliver's father was a married man who told me he loved me and then vanished the moment the pregnancy test came back positive? Does any of that matter?" Lorraine's voice was gentle but firm, the voice of someone who had seen too much to be easily fooled. "It matters to people like Felicity. It matters to the business associates Dominic needs to work with. It matters to whoever's been making trouble at my job." Eliza's voice cracked despite her best efforts to hold it steady. "I can't watch his life get destroyed because of me. His reputation, his business, everything he's built. I won't be the anchor that drags him down to my level. Shouldn't that be his choice to make? Not if I can make it for him." The words tasted like ash, but she forced them out anyway. "He deserves better than this, better than me." She sent the text that night, after Oliver was asleep, and the flat was dark and quiet, and there was no one to see her fall apart. Simple, direct, cowardly. "I can't do this anymore, I'm sorry. Please don't contact me. Give Oliver time and he'll forget. Children adapt. Tell him I'm sorry." Then she blocked Dominic's number and cried until her chest ached and her eyes swelled shut, until Oliver woke up confused and frightened by the sounds she was making and crawled into her lap, patting her face with his small hands. "Mama sad?" "Mama's okay, baby." The lie was acid on her tongue, burning as it came out. "Mama's going to be fine." "Mama okay," Oliver repeated, like a prayer or a promise he was trying to will into existence. "No sad, happy." She held him until they both fell asleep on the couch, wrapped around each other like survivors of a shipwreck, clinging to the only solid thing left in the water. 2 weeks passed, the longest, emptiest, most colorless 2 weeks of Eliza's life. She threw herself into work with a desperation that frightened even her, picking up every available shift until her feet were permanent agony, and her eyes burned from exhaustion. She couldn't sleep away, no matter how tired she was. She came home, only to collect Oliver from childcare, feed him whatever she could manage to prepare with shaking hands, bathe him, put him to bed, and then lie awake in the darkness listening to the silence where Dominic's voice used to be. Oliver asked about Dominic constantly, with the relentless persistence only toddlers possess. "Where, Dom?" became his first words every morning, shouted before he was even fully awake, before his eyes were all the way open. "Dom come," was his last question every night, asked with such desperate hope it shattered her anew each time she had to answer. She ran out of excuses by day 3 and settled for a simple "Dom is busy, sweetheart" that satisfied no one, least of all herself. "Dom busy," Oliver would repeat doubtfully, clutching the toy dinosaur he refused to be separated from, the one he had named in that moment of innocent joy that felt like it had happened to a different person in a different life. "Come soon?" "Maybe, baby. Maybe." Lorraine tried to intervene, showing up at the flat with tea and barely concealed frustration radiating off her in waves. "That man called me," she said, settling onto Eliza's couch with the determination of someone who wasn't leaving until she'd had her say and been properly heard. "Showed up at my door, actually, looking like he hadn't slept in a week, like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He doesn't understand what happened, Eliza. He thinks he did something wrong." "Good." Eliza kept her voice hard, though maintaining the mask was becoming harder every day. "He'll move on, find someone better, someone who fits in his world. He doesn't want someone who fits. He wants you. He'll get over it. People always do." Douglas came next, appearing at Harrington's during her lunch shift, sitting in her section and ordering food he didn't touch, just pushing it around his plate while he watched her work. "I'm not here to change your mind," he said when she could no longer avoid him, when all her other tables had been served and cleared and there was nowhere left to hide. "I'm just here to tell you what I see. What everyone who knows Dominic sees." "And what's that?" She refilled his water glass, a task to occupy her trembling hands. "A woman who's been knocked down so many times she doesn't believe she deserves to stay standing. A woman who's so accustomed to things falling apart that she'd rather do the breaking herself. At least that way, she controls something in a life where she's controlled so little. A woman who has convinced herself that being alone is safer than being hurt, even though the loneliness is its own kind of wound." Douglas met her eyes, and there was no judgment there, only sad understanding. "Does any of that sound familiar? You don't know anything about me." The denial was automatic, a shield she had learned to raise without thinking. "I know that Dominic hasn't slept properly in 2 weeks. I know he cancelled 3 major business meetings because he couldn't focus, couldn't think about anything except what went wrong, what he might have done differently. I know that he's been going through the motions of a life that meant something to him a month ago and now means nothing at all." Douglas paused, letting the words land where they would. "I know he loves you. Really loves you in a way I've never seen him love anyone in all the years I've known him." Eliza's hands trembled so badly she had to set down the water pitcher before she dropped it and made a scene. "He'll recover. He'll find someone else." "Will he? Will you?" Douglas slid a card across the white tablecloth. "Felicity's been removed from all Westbrook social functions, by the way. Margaret made some calls after she heard what's been happening, what Felicity's been doing behind the scenes. Whatever pressure was being applied at your job should stop." He left without another word, leaving the card sitting on the table like an invitation or a challenge, or maybe both at once. The card had an address on it, a gallery opening this Saturday night, the Westbrook Foundation's annual art showcase. "In case you change your mind," was written on the back in Douglas's careful handwriting. Eliza didn't throw the card away. She couldn't bring herself to, though she couldn't have explained why, if her life depended on it. It sat on her kitchen counter like an accusation, reminding her every morning and every night of what she had walked away from, of who she had walked away from. Oliver found it on Thursday evening, drawn by the fancy lettering on the front. "Pretty," he said, holding it up to show her, his small face hopeful. "Dom?" "No, baby." Her voice caught like something sharp was lodged in her throat. "Not Dom." Oliver's face crumpled, the sudden devastating heartbreak that toddlers feel so completely because they haven't yet learned to protect themselves from it. "Miss Dom. Want Dom. Dom come home?" And there, in her tiny kitchen with the leaking tap Dominic had fixed, with her 2-year-old son crying for a man she had pushed away, Eliza finally let herself feel the full, crushing weight of what she had done. She had been so afraid of being hurt that she had hurt everyone. Herself, constantly bleeding from a wound she kept reopening every time she looked at Oliver's face. Oliver, who didn't understand why his friend had disappeared, who asked about Dom every single day with that terrible, innocent hope. Dominic, who had done nothing wrong except love her when she didn't believe she deserved it. She had convinced herself that leaving was noble, that she was protecting the people she loved from the disaster that was her life. But protection didn't look like this. Protection didn't feel like a gaping wound that wouldn't heal no matter how many days passed. Protection didn't sound like her son crying himself to sleep, clutching a dinosaur named Dom. Okay. She pulled Oliver into her arms, breathing in his familiar scent. Okay, baby. Mama made a mistake. A big one. But Mama's going to try to fix it. Oh, fix it? Oliver looked up at her, tear tracks still wet on his cheeks, his eyes red and swollen. Dom come back? Mama's going to try, sweetheart. That's all she can promise right now. But she's going to try as hard as she can. It would have to be enough. Saturday night arrived wrapped in the kind of nervous energy Eliza hadn't felt since she was a teenager preparing for her first school formal. The gallery was beautiful, all white walls and strategic lighting, art hung at careful intervals, sculptures positioned to catch the eye and invite contemplation. People moved through the space in expensive clothes, speaking in cultured voices about technique and composition and emotional resonance. Eliza felt every curious glance, heard every whispered speculation. The single mother who had caught Dominic Westbrook's eye, the waitress who had gotten ideas above her station, the nobody who had somehow stumbled into their midst and then had the audacity to leave. She had borrowed a dress from Lorraine, simple, elegant, a deep green that Lorraine claimed brought out her eyes, but that Eliza had chosen because it was the only thing that fit. She had done her own makeup with hands that shook and kept shaking, had arranged her hair 3 times before settling on something that looked intentional rather than desperate. She didn't know if Dominic would be here. She didn't know if he would speak to her if he was. She didn't know anything except that she had to try, had to at least attempt to repair the damage before it became permanent. Before he moved on completely and she lost him forever. She found him near the back of the gallery, standing alone before a large abstract painting she couldn't have described if her life depended on it. He looked the same, and completely different, still handsome, still composed on the surface, but hollow underneath in a way that was visible only if you knew where to look, if you loved him enough to see past the mask. He turned as if he sensed her presence, and his expression when he saw her made her heart crack open all over again. Eliza. He said her name like a prayer and a question and an accusation all rolled together. I'm sorry. The words tumbled out before she could arrange them properly, before she could make them eloquent or impressive. I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you, protecting Oliver. I thought if I left first, if I controlled the ending, it would hurt less than waiting for you to realize I wasn't worth the trouble. But I was really just protecting myself from getting hurt again, and in the process, I hurt everyone worse than... Why did you come tonight? She stopped, thrown off balance by the interruption. What? Why did you come? His voice gave nothing away, flat and careful. After 2 weeks of silence, after blocking my number, after making it very clear you wanted nothing to do with me. Because Oliver cries for you every night. He asks about you constantly. Where's Dom? When's Dom coming back? Because I can't sleep without hearing your voice, without reaching for you in the darkness and finding nothing. Because I was a coward, Dominic. I was so scared of losing something good that I threw it away before anyone could take it from me. She stepped closer, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into his face, the new lines around his mouth. I came because walking away from you was the worst mistake of my life, and even if you've moved on, even if it's too late, you deserve to know that. And what if I have moved on? His expression remained unreadable, giving her nothing to hold on to. What if you're too late? What if the past 2 weeks taught me that caring about someone isn't worth the risk? Eliza felt her heart finish its slow, terrible fracture. Then I'd understand. I broke something precious because I was too scared to believe I deserved it. Sometimes broken things can't be fixed, no matter how sorry we are. But I had to tell you. I had to at least tell you that I love you. Whatever comes next, whether you forgive me or not, you deserve to hear that. I love you. I've never stopped loving you. Not for a single second of these past 2 weeks. The silence between them stretched impossibly long. Around them, the gallery continued its murmur of refined conversation and soft music, beautiful people discussing beautiful art, completely oblivious to the two people standing in the corner with their entire future trembling in the balance. Then, Dominic moved. He crossed the remaining distance between them in 2 quick steps, gathered her face in his hands, and kissed her with everything he had been holding back for 2 weeks. The kiss was desperate and tender and furious all at once, tasting of coffee and something sweet, communicating everything words couldn't manage. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were bright with tears he was no longer trying to hide. "Don't you ever," he said hoarsely, "do that to me again." "I won't." She was crying now, didn't care who saw or what they thought. "I promise, Dominic, I won't ever—" "I love you." He pressed his forehead to hers, their breath mingling. "I love Oliver. I want to build a life with both of you, a real life, not a perfect one, not an easy one, but ours, together. Is that what you want?" "More than anything." She laughed through her tears. "Even with my mess of a past, my empty bank account, my ongoing feud with basic financial stability, especially with all of that." He smiled, and it was like watching the sun come out after a storm, light flooding into all the dark corners. "I'd rather have 1,000 messy days with you than perfection with anyone else. Perfection is boring. You're interesting." Someone nearby cleared their throat loudly. Douglas, looking immensely pleased with himself, was standing a few feet away, holding 2 glasses of champagne with the air of someone who had been planning this moment. "I hate to interrupt this touching reunion," he said, "but there are approximately 200 people in this gallery, and about half of them have their phones out recording." Eliza laughed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Let them record. Let them post it everywhere. I don't care anymore." "Neither do I." Dominic took her hand, lacing their fingers together like he never intended to let go again. "But my mother is heading this way at considerable speed, and she's going to want to know if Oliver is available for lunch tomorrow." Margaret Westbrook descended upon them in a cloud of expensive perfume and maternal determination, her heels clicking decisively on the gallery floor. "Eliza." She took both of Eliza's hands in hers, her grip surprisingly warm. "Douglas told me what happened, what Felicity has been doing behind the scenes. I want you to know that woman will never attend another social event in this city. I've made certain of it." "Thank you," Eliza managed, "but you didn't have to." "Nonsense! I protect my family." Margaret's eyes were fierce with a mother's protective fire. "And you, my dear, whether you've realized it yet or not, are family." The night ended not at the gallery but at Eliza's flat, collecting Oliver from the babysitter together and tucking him into bed. The toddler had been too sleepy to fully register what was happening, but when Dominic leaned down to kiss his forehead, Oliver's small hand reached up to pat his cheek. "Dom back," he murmured, already sliding into dreams, a smile curving his lips. "Love, Dom." "I love you too, little man." Dominic's voice was rough with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere, not ever again." In the kitchen, over cups of tea neither of them was awake enough to actually drink, they talked until the sky outside began to lighten, about fears and failures, about the future and what shape they wanted it to take, about Oliver growing up, about Sunday lunches with Margaret, about finding a home that could hold all 3 of them, and whatever came next. "Move in with me," Dominic said suddenly, the words tumbling out like he couldn't hold them back anymore. "Not to my penthouse, somewhere new, somewhere that's ours from the beginning, with a garden for Oliver to destroy, and a spare room for Lorraine to stay in when she visits, and space for us to become whatever we're becoming." "That's terrifying." Eliza set down her cup. "A huge step. Completely impractical on multiple levels." "I know." He watched her face, waiting. "I've been making sensible, practical decisions my whole life," she continued slowly. "Playing it safe, protecting myself. And all it's brought me is loneliness and exhaustion and a flat I can barely afford to heat in winter. Is that a yes?" She thought about Oliver's face when he saw Dominic. About the way her heart felt full instead of hollow when they were together. About what it might mean to choose joy instead of just surviving. "That's a yes," she said. "Let's be impractical together." Dominic's smile was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The wedding was small, just as they had both wanted. Family and close friends only, held in the garden of the home they had found together. A modest house by Dominic's standards, palatial by Eliza's, and absolutely perfect for all of them. The garden was bursting with spring flowers, and someone had strung fairy lights through the old eucalyptus trees that lined the back fence. Oliver served as ring-bearer and only tried to eat the rings twice, distracted both times by the promise of more cake later. Lorraine cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that was soaked through before the vows were even finished. Douglas gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying simultaneously, full of stories about Dominic's cricket failures and the first time Douglas had met Eliza at the auction. Margaret Westbrook watched it all from the front row with something like wonder softening her usually composed features. "I didn't think I'd see him this happy," she told Eliza during the reception, catching her near the dessert table. "After his father died, after Felicity, I worried he'd closed himself off forever, that he'd never let anyone in again. He opened me up too," Eliza admitted, watching her new husband carrying Oliver around the garden, pointing out butterflies and flowers to the delighted toddler. "I thought I knew what love looked like. I was wrong. You know what I see when I look at you two?" Margaret's voice was softer than Eliza had ever heard it. "I see what I had with my husband before he passed. That absolute certainty that this person, this one person out of everyone in the world, is home. Don't take it for granted. Don't ever stop fighting for it." "I won't," Eliza promised. "Not anymore." That night, after the guests had gone, and Oliver had finally crashed into exhausted sleep surrounded by his dinosaur army, Eliza stood on the back porch of their new home and looked up at the stars. Dominic came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But the good kind, the kind that means something. Good." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'd be worried if you weren't at least a little scared. This is a big deal. The biggest." She leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his solidity, his absolute presence. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for coming to that cafe even though you probably knew I'd try to run, for seeing something in me worth fighting for. Thank you for running straight toward me at that gallery, for choosing us, for being brave enough to try again." He turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you, Mrs. Westbrook. I love you too, Mr. Westbrook." She smiled through the tears that seemed to come so easily these days, tears of joy instead of sorrow. "Though I'm keeping Mitchell professionally, can't confuse the customers at Harrington's." He laughed, and the sound was everything, joy and relief and promise all wrapped together. The story they would tell later to Oliver when he was old enough to understand was simple. His mother met a man who saw past everything the world told him to see, who chose her when it was hard, who stayed when it would have been easier to leave, who loved not just her, but him from almost the very first moment. And it started, all of it, with one moment of honest vulnerability. "Sorry," she had said, "I can't afford this date." What happened next shocked everyone. But it shouldn't have. Because sometimes the people who have the least to offer are the ones who give us everything we've been missing. And sometimes the courage to admit our weaknesses is the strongest thing we can do. If this story touched something inside you, leave a comment. Sometimes recognizing what we feel changes more than we imagine. Your comment may help someone who's suffering in silence today.